Welcome to another episode of the Miles Offside podcast, where we talk a little bit of football and a whole lot of nonsense. My name is Oscar Puente, also known as Footy from Afar, and with me I have a very, very special guest. It is my real-life friend, Patreon of the pod, and recurring character, my buddy Nick. What's up, Nick? How's it going?
Hi, everybody. Nick here. Very much real, very much live in person.
Yeah, really exciting. We kicked Ian and Chuck out this week because it is 4th of July, so we can't have any Brits around here. But we are doing a summer series of preview-ish type podcasts, kind of bonus episodes over the summer. Chuck will be bringing to you a collection of preview pods of the teams that would probably get a little less attention from us, aka all the ones that start with B, so your Brighton, your Bournemouth, your Bevertons, all of those. And I thought this would be a good time in between seasons and coming off of the back of your first season as a Premier League fan, as a soccer fan, to check in and kind of see how that went for you. I think you have a really interesting and unique perspective that people might want to hear. I know a lot of people in between the summers tend to be like, oh, am I going to get into the Premier League? Is this a new thing that I have interest in? So I thought it would be a good time to talk to you about that. But first, how's your summer going, bud?
Summer's going great. Just got back in town, back home yesterday. We went to a wedding in the Midwest, took Nora on a plane. Lovely to see some friends, especially after still sort of coming out of 2 years of not really seeing anybody. So it was lovely. Lovely to get out there.
Yeah,
Happy to be home, though.
Nora is a child and not an adult person, just to be clear for the listeners.
Nora is my, today, 10-month-old daughter.
Oh, happy 10th month birthday to the Nugget.
Yeah. Not sure what to call it either, but it's exciting.
Yeah, good times. All right. So I figured we could start off with the first question of why soccer and why now? What sort of drew you to the Premier League? Why 2021 was your first time you were like, hey, I'm going to check this shit out? Like, what brought you here?
Yeah. So I've been a long time sports player and sports watcher. As an American, mostly focused on Major League Baseball and the National Football League. And it wasn't necessarily that I had wanted to find a new sport, but rather a new sport found me based off of changes that were happening in my life. So I'm a high school teacher, and I've been teaching high school for 6 years. And going back to my first couple years teaching, those first couple years are totally crazy. You spend Monday through Friday frantically trying to get through the day with your head on straight, and then you spend a lot of your weekend, or at least I did, and I know a lot of my peers do, just sort of frantically grading things and then trying to make plans for the next week. And the way that manifested itself in my life was being in my living room in front of a TV at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time and putting on whatever sports were on, which was usually the Premier League. My wife, Caitlin, was totally cool with it. She grew up being an athlete, playing largely basketball and soccer. So watching the Premier League sort of casually has been a thing that's been in our life and in my life specifically for several years. And it was going into this year that we kind of decided we wanted to make a commitment, right? We didn't want to see each other casually anymore. We wanted to make things serious.
Yeah.
You
have a baby. You're like, we're going to have to raise this child in some sort of soccer household, so we should probably pick a team.
Yeah. Oh, and that was such a big element of it too, because I don't know anyone who's listening who has a child who was an infant, which is all children. You can't really do anything for 6 months. You are just going from wake window to wake window. So we really want to make a commitment this year to intensify sort of what the soccer watching experience is going to be, to give us something have a little bit more emotional connection to it.
Awesome. Love that. That's interesting too, because I think for a lot of Americans, it tends to be around the World Cup. They're and that certainly was the case for me of I really like this. Maybe I should find more. But that's a pretty cool way to come to it. I like that. Why don't you give us then a review of how'd that go with your 7:30 kickoffs and your afternoon kickoffs during the week and all that, general first impressions after your first year of Premier League fandom.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great ritual, not just adding on to I'm still a high school teacher, so I still need that weekend time to get my ish together for the following week. So having soccer being able to join us on these rituals of professional life, but also now being a parent is a deep connection that helped us get through some of those challenging first couple months of this burgeoning adventure that is parenthood. Should we talk about how we picked a team?
Yeah, we'll definitely get to that for sure. I think I want to keep it a little general at first.
Cool.
So, for example, how would you compare it to you said you're MLB and NFL guy?
Yeah.
You're more traditional quote unquote American sports. How does like your outside perspective on Premier League fandom compare to that? Like, is it really different? Is it sports basically the same thing everywhere? How'd that go for you?
There are definitely elements of similarity to all sports fandoms. I think that it kind of has, in many ways, Premier League has an ideal number of matches, if that makes sense. For example, the National Football League, they have like 17 regular season games, which is great. And as a sports addict, like they have this perfect amount that keeps you wanting more. But then as a lived experience, like you just want more American football and you're not getting it. Whereas baseball has 162 games. And
an insane amount. Like, frankly, an insane amount of sports.
It's too many games. You can't realistically, as an adult, watch them all, which means you're sort of just like checking your phone to see box scores and keeping up with statistics, or in my case, like some fantasy teams to like sort of see the strokes and the trajectories of the season. Whereas like the Premier League schedule is kind of perfect. Getting every team twice, you're getting it over a long enough period of time that like if you happen to miss the rest of the league 1 week, like it's sort of, you're not missing out on that much, but it's peppered in perfectly. So I enjoyed the scope of the season, even if I was annoyed by sometimes there's just like randomly not matches on random weekends. And as a first timer, I didn't know that was coming, so that was really upsetting.
Oh, the international breaks, we hate them too. Longtime fans hate them just as much.
Yeah, Africa Cup of Nations this year.
Yes, although I think that got moved because of like flooding or something. I don't know. Look it up, people. But okay. Yeah, that does provide an interesting sort of wrench in the fandom nature of it. And there's also all the different cup competitions, the Champions League, the FA Cup, the League Cup. Did that confuse you? Did that add too much of the soccer? Were you able to separate that out and mostly just watch the Prem? How was that?
There was definitely not too much of the soccer. But what I would say is like, and I suppose we'll come back to this in a little bit, is like the FA Cup and your Carabao Cups and the Champions League, they all provided like different wrinkles and elements that I found were really interesting. I thought it was really neat to get, at least in America, the ESPN Plus app and like watch random FA Cup matches of like a third tier team versus some semi-professional team. That was just thrilling to me. That I thought that was the most romantic thing maybe I'd ever seen in sports. I remember specifically AFC Wimbledon, the third tier team lost to some fifth tier team at the fifth tier team's park, and I was like, these guys might be playing in my neighborhood right now, and they just beat a professional team. I was moved emotionally by that competition.
That's fascinating. That's so the opposite of me. You and Ian are like out here just standing the pyramid, just being like, yes, local pub team, very important.
It was so neat, and it wasn't that it was important. It's objectively silly, but it was just there's romance involved in it that I can't perfectly articulate right now, but it was beautiful.
I love that. I love to hear that. At least somebody out here on this side of the pond is enjoying the lower division teams going at it.
Another element of the Premier League that I really liked, I didn't really know that this was going to be so compelling, was that like not just the title race, but your race for Champions League, your race for Europa, then the relegation battle. And like maybe this year was particularly compelling. There were so many things to be decided going into the last couple of weeks, but that it's in a really interesting element. I remember, and like spoiler alert, didn't choose to support Everton, but I remember following the is Everton going to be relegated battle, and it being just as compelling as who's going to win the league. The notion of like a club that historic would be relegated, to me, was just completely fascinating.
Oh, I love relegation. It is one of my favorite things about the Premier League compared to American sports, because as a longtime Knicks fan, I've seen a lot of tanking seasons where a team's like, we don't have anything to play for, we're just going to lose as much as possible, maybe get a better draft pick. And that has always driven me crazy. Like, at least go out there and like give it a go.
Right.
And in the Prem, there's so much to root for up and down the table. It's fascinating. I guess in basketball, the closest thing would be like the final playoff spot or the wild card race in baseball.
Yeah.
Right. But like you can check in your team, whether you're a mid-table team, a top team, a bottom team. Yeah. There's like, you're going to have something probably going on at the end of the year. So that's really, really cool for me, at least.
Yeah, 100%. And like one thing I know it's never going to happen, but I wish would happen in American sports is like, I imagine that relegation battle, like, this is a reference that maybe only you are going to understand. A Week 18 game that's like Jacksonville Jaguars versus New York Jets mattering, because one of those teams would be semi-professional next year. That's like that would be so profoundly compelling to me that I didn't know how much I was going to really eat up the relegation race, and just be truly fascinated by it.
I mean, calling the Jets semi-professional is generous, if anything, I think. So let's come back to the team then, the team choosing experience. How was that for you? How did you go into it? Like, did you have a strategy in mind when you came in? Did you have a couple of teams you had previously picked out? I know we went to a Bright Eyes concert and spent 12 hours just going through the history of the teams and stuff. So talk me through that process for you.
Yeah, I was gonna say let's walk people through the dinner conversation prior to the concert, because I think for me, for a couple of years, Caitlin, my wife, and I had been considering we should pick a team to make this more interesting, more compelling. And what's so weird about that process is it's completely unnatural to, as an adult, pick a sports fandom, to choose one. Mm-hmm. Because again, we've established you and I both have American sports interests. I love baseball, I love American football, but the teams that I chose to root for, the Boston Red Sox and the New England Patriots, I chose to root for because my dad and my dad's dad rooted for them. I inherited that fandom as a child, and the moments that made me commit to that fandom happened when I was, in the case of the Patriots, 11 years old, and in case of the Red Sox, really just a childhood of tragedy. And then when I was 14 years old, them winning the World Series in the most unimaginable way possible. So those moments were forged into me as an adolescent. And when you're coming as an adult, you have to go through the intellectual process of, what team should I root for? And that's when you and I laid down a bunch of criteria. I remember a few. Do you remember a bunch?
I know my criteria from when I chose Chelsea, because I've told this story so many times over the years, but I think it's really different for everyone. And I think that is the natural place to start. Yeah, so for me, I wanted a London team because I want to go visit London and I want to go see that team play. And realistically, if I'm going to England, I don't want to take a day or two away from London to go visit Liverpool, or although I've heard good things, Manchester. I specifically was okay, it's got to be a London team for me. And I also didn't want to inherit another Knicks. So for me, it was I want a team competing at the top, right? And that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. So I don't remember all of them. What were your sort of criteria when you were hiring for this position?
So you nailed two of them right off the bat. So the first was, I want it to be in a city that I want to go to, right? So I've been to the UK. I've spent not a significant amount of time, but a fairly significant amount of time as a just traveling American in England. So I've been to a couple cities. So I knew I wanted to be a place that I'd want to go to again, so I could theoretically go to a game. Then I know another one was I think the exact words were along the lines of I want them to be more or less competitive every year, right? I want it to be realistic that when we start each year, there's a hope that they're going to be at least competing for fourth, right? And given the nature of the league, there aren't that many teams that are competing for first every year. Yeah. So competing for fourth for many teams, for many teams and fandoms, is totally a valid goal to aspire to. I remember we talked ownership, and it's hard to evaluate the goodness of various evil billionaires. Yeah. But I remember I didn't want to be an oil state. And not to bootlick ownership, but one of the reasons I chose who I did was because of a continuity and ownership thing. I wanted some kits that were rockable.
Okay, okay, I like that.
I wanted some proper drip, and
that would be a huge plus in the Arsenal column to me. They have as much as it pains me to say, their uniforms are consistently stylish.
It's about all they have going for them. And then I remember a couple more. One of them was, I remember this specifically, was I wanted a team with a long history of mostly pain.
Okay.
Right?
There's plenty to choose from there. That's for sure.
Right. There's a lot of teams that way, but I think I wanted, I didn't want to jump in on a bandwagon, even if that was going to bring me more short-term joy. And this is an intellectual exercise of selecting a team. I don't have this generational involvement of it, so I wouldn't feel super guilty of picking a city. Intellectually, if you want the most joy out of your watching experience, you should probably pick them, but they didn't hit a lot of the other criteria.
Okay, all right, cool. So I do remember That sounds like you pretty quickly narrowed it down to the big six. I do remember talking you off of the Everton team. Like that was
did.
In the running, and I was very concerned.
Thank God you did.
Yeah, what was it about Everton that kind of drew you for a second there before you kind of rolled them out?
So there's a couple things. First off, as you said on the pod, and like a thing that's like kind of unbelievable for your co-host is that like there's like a really sizable American Everton fan base.
There is, yes, they're all over.
I don't remember why. You told me a story once. Why do you remember?
Yeah, so obviously Tim Howard was like one of the most famous American players, especially when that like the 2014 World Cup with that game against Belgium. With all the saves, I don't know how much you'll remember that, but like a lot of Americans were like, "Oh, this Tim Howard guy, he's pretty cool." And he was a longtime Everton guy. Also, Landon Donovan went to Everton for a few Januaries in a row there when it was like first taking off, 2010, 2014 World Cups time. There's just kind of always been an American presence at Everton. And once a community starts, you know, like if I'm recruiting someone to be a Premier League fan in America, I'm going to try to recruit them to my team, or at least a team that they're going to have people to talk to about. Like no one wants to be, full disrespect to Chuck, a Palace fan in America, because like you're not going to know anyone who's a Palace fan. Like they're just not around, right?
I met a Palace fan. Sorry, I realized someone I know was a Palace fan just this past weekend while traveling.
Really?
So Chuck, if you're ever in Rumford, Rhode Island, look for Leandro, and he'll be rocking his Palace gear.
There you go, a Palace fan in the wild in America. Fascinating. So we pretty quickly narrowed it down for you. We were was it in Worcester, Mass, that we went to that concert?
We were in Worcester.
Yeah.
A town that you were just in love with, brother.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Love all the New England towns. But we were walking around and I remember selling Spurs much. You were like very quickly onto the teams that I hate, which felt passive aggressive if I'm being honest. But yeah, so like, what was in the running? What were like the last kind of finalists, the last round of interviews for you? Do you remember?
Yeah. So I remember, like of the criteria we laid out, history, chance of being successful most years, fly uniforms, again, history of mostly pain, and then like not evil ownership. It had really narrowed it down to just a couple teams. And like, regardless of the ownership thing, and this was before Chelsea's whole gestures vaguely at everything, I wouldn't have picked Chelsea anyway. I wouldn't pick Chelsea anyway because like I want to pick a team that was gonna bug you. You know what I mean? Like I wanted our soccer commitment to one another to like be playfully antagonistic. And you know, if we were just sitting there being like, "Man, Chelsea are good. It was fun to watch them win today." Like I feel like that's a little less fun as the competition. And then like obviously both Manchester teams were out because like I couldn't in good conscience like pick United to root for.
Yeah.
For just a bunch of all the reasons your fans know. And then City felt too easy to pick City. You did try and persuade me down that line. Like you draw out that logic where like, hey man, if you want to have the most fun watching a team, like fun being a stand-in for winning, like there's no shame in pitching this team. But for me, it felt too much like deciding I'm going to like baseball and choosing to like the Yankees or the Dodgers. They have so many material advantages that it didn't feel right. So we kind of narrowed it down to Spurs, who you were just really, really trying to get me to bite on. We narrowed it down to West Ham.
Oof. Okay.
I know.
Glad that didn't work out.
We narrowed it down to Arsenal and then Liverpool.
Okay. Yeah. So that's all fair. I mean, I have said this on the pod before, and I do stand by it, that if I was coming in, I would definitely end up a City fan. I do want trophies. I don't want just top four for me personally. Like I want trophies because that's cool.
Yeah. Trophies rule.
They had a lot of the other criteria. Like they have that history of being like the little brother to Manchester United and the lovable losers and all that sort of stuff. Obviously, their recent history is all of success, but that's like a very, very small time window.
Yeah.
But I can definitely see that feeling too bandwagony of a pick. But Liverpool at the same time is like a pretty massive club. Liverpool is who you ended up going for, to stop kind of beating around the bush there.
Spoiler alert. Up the Reds.
What was it about? Yeah, gross. What was it about Liverpool that sort of sealed the deal for you? Why them over Arsenal or Spurs, for example?
Well, it came down to being a coin flip between Spurs and Liverpool. Arsenal were removed when you and I, right before Nora was born, went out with Caitlin and Emily, the good doctor, and I just remember Emily shitting all over Arsenal,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd be like, all right, if Emily's dunking on anything this hard, it has to be so cringy, like it has to be terrible, and so they're out of the running. Um, so honestly, it came down to much of a coin flip, and ultimately, I remember like Liverpool just being a little bit more fun to watch the previous couple of years. Its online fandom being a pretty lovely and supporting community, and ultimately, like, kind of just viewed them as having a better chance to have like a winning future. Over the next, several years, and if not, if all goes well to John Henry's ownership model, just sustained, not dominance, but sustained very, very goodness over the foreseeable future.
It does look to be a stable ship, let's say.
Yeah.
They recruit really well. The analytics, the baseball connection actually is fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Obviously, on an emotional level, like you are a Red Sox fan, so that's going to draw you towards Liverpool. You're more likely to see them in the summers. They're going to want to play in New England a lot. But like, sports-wise, independent of the Red Sox connection, Liverpool is a very like baseball kind of team.
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm really happy you asked, because I wanted to, and I wasn't sure like if people would want me to start trying to wax poetic about the Boston Red Sox. But like, what I would say is there's a lot of connections between those two teams in that they're very old teams, they're very historic teams, and they're teams that most of their seasons usually end up really close to the pinnacle of the championship, but usually failing in an embarrassing way towards the end of the season.
For example, with about 15 minutes to play and the title in hand, and then it all falls apart?
Yes, but just like that. And, growing up a Red Sox fan, and I'm not going to go too long about this, but like the Red Sox famously had an 86-year window between World Series victories. Prior to 2004, the last one they won was in 1918. They always played second fiddle to the New York Yankees, your New York Yankees, of course.
Beloved.
Who are an iconic franchise, just winning basically every third World Series for the better part of 100 years. And Boston would get either very close to a World Series or go into a World Series and lose in just unbelievable ways. If you saw the movie about them losing, you would say that this is outrageous. This would never happen. And when I was 14 years old, they famously came back from 0-3 and beat the Yankees for 4-3 in the championship.
I still have a knuckle that's too big compared to the rest of the knuckles from that 2004 series, that stolen base and all the other things that I try not to think about ever again.
Just absolutely magical stuff from my perspective, and like pain for you, but like whatever. We lost one thing.
Yeah. We have plenty other ones to kind of fall back on.
So like there's that continuity, not just of ownership, and again, like fuck John Henry forever, right? He's a super billionaire, but that continuity in sort of like style of play, that continuity of being from a second tier town that has a little bit of a grudge on its shoulder, that they play hard, they play in a feisty way. It occasionally embarrasses themselves, but when it all comes together, it comes together in a magical and beautiful way. So I just saw sort of that sort of like dual trajectory amongst these clubs that felt very familiar. Rooting for Liverpool felt very familiar to rooting for the Red Sox, and like they might ultimately be the best on paper, but they'll find a way to screw it up. But when they put it all together, it's a thing of beauty.
They're never boring. I'll say that for sure. I think you managed to piss off both Bostonians and Liverpudlians in that sentence by calling it a second tier city, which I loved. Thank you for that.
It is. I understand. It's the Boston's the greatest city in America, but it's a second tier city.
Yeah, I mean, it's not New York and it's not London, so I think that's exactly right. Would you recommend Liverpool to new fans coming? Like, let's say you're a random American listening to this because you're like, oh, maybe I'll get into the Premier League. Like, is that who you suggest?
Oh, totally. And I'll tell you why. So, like, okay, random American. Hello, random American. You have stumbled upon the Miles Offside podcast, and
Condolences.
you happen to be listening to the episode where the guy who chose the Premier League team last year is waxing poetic about baseball. And what I would say is it was a lot of fun to root for Liverpool this season. And one of the reasons that made it exciting to me as I learned more about the game, and this is going to sound super fucking American, but like they score a lot of goals. Americans love points. Yeah. We love points. We hate Wolves. And just like they play such beautiful attacking football that like even when they're not scoring, I don't know, 2 or 3 goals a game, they're constantly attacking. And that to me, the sensation of watching a Liverpool game and knowing that they could score at any moment has made me more engaged than, say, I don't know, this year's Champions League final or some like World Cup final where basically the other team's waiting for the other team to fuck up. They're playing conservatively and waiting for one spontaneous counterattack. No, Liverpool is constantly pushing, and the sensation or the feeling that they're probably going to score at any moment made watching pretty much every game completely thrilling.
I mean, you're not wrong. Like when you have Salah and Mane doing Salah and Mane things, and then you bring in all the new young players that they're bringing in, and like they're transitioning really well. It's tough. I would say to new fans personally, I would not advise Arsenal or United or Spurs of the big 6 because, like, realistically, they're the small 3 of the big 6. I don't know how to say that.
That's a good way to put it.
So, you know, you kind of narrow it down to Chelsea, City, and Liverpool. I think if you want trophies and if you want like a bigger city of those, you might want to choose based on the geography of that. I don't know.
Yeah.
But those are the 3 fun teams with the most long-term prospects of continuing to be fun.
Yeah.
Although who knows how it's going to be with the new Dodgers ownership at Chelsea. The Baseball Connection, I hope, will be good long-term. They'll be run more like Liverpool, but we'll see.
I think it's going to be spectacular for you, my man.
Yeah, actually, while I have you, this is not at all the theme of the podcast, but you know baseball more than pretty much anybody. Like, what am I in for as a now Dodgers-owned soccer fan?
Okay, so to keep it concise, the Los Angeles Dodgers do everything any sports fandom would want their ownership to do.
Oh, yeah.
In that, they have an infinite pocketbook that they are always willing to pull from, but they pull from using decisions that are purely based off of analytics, and they are just unwilling to not get better every year. An example of this is the Los Angeles Dodgers won the World Series 2 years ago.
Okay.
Last year, they went to the championship series against the Atlanta Braves. They lost in 7 games. And instead of saying like, oh, man, if we had just won one more game, we'd be back in the World Series, they went out and they bought the best first baseman in planet Earth, despite the fact that they have a really good first baseman as it is.
Okay.
They are unwilling to tolerate anything other than always competing. And they make really smart decisions based off of really smart, analytically informed decisions, and they can just spend. They're like the Yankees if the Yankees had an econ degree.
That's yes, thank you. I just fully erect at this point. So that is
showing, my man.
Excellent stuff. Yeah, I mean, do you want to rant a little bit about Mane leaving, or any kind of like Liverpool thoughts here on the way out? We pretty much covered it in terms of like what I wanted to talk about.
So I don't like have a lot of like Mane leaving thoughts, but I actually do want to try and like thematically bridge the idea of like making analytically informed decisions as it relates to like fandom.
Okay.
So I remember before it was clear that Mane was going to be the one who was leaving and Salah was going to be the one who was staying, you were trying to make not like a hot takey take, but the economically informed decision that like maybe it would be better to keep Mane and sell Salah because the returns on Salah would be so much more and you could invest that in other parts of the club. And like, I guess my point would be that that's probably the more efficient economic team building strategy. But sometimes with fandom, you want to see like your guy be around. Sometimes fandom is illogical. In that, like, maybe since it's not your money, you're content with them spending it on the guy you want to see staying in your laundry.
Yeah,
And
that makes sense. I mean, does not compute, right? Because
yeah,
like I am the stats robot and all that, but like
yeah,
I do tend to forget the emotional side of it,
yeah.
just because the emotional side of fandom has led to so many bad things in general,
Hmm.
like the
Yeah.
tribalism and all that sort of stuff that I try to not engage with it. But at the end of the day, like it is, you're right. It's nice to see your players wearing your shirt. Like,
Hmm. Yeah, just the dudes you want to see around. Um, I have one thing I wanted to spout, to wax poetic about. If you have another couple minutes,
yeah, of course, I have many minutes, as many as you want.
beautiful. So one thing that was really interesting about picking a team as an adult was, all right. So like, let's pretend your Knicks season started, right?
Hmm.
You have expectations. You have all of your, X number of years that you've invested in this club. It was so sorry, and all the emotions that go along with that. It was so profoundly strange to say, like, okay, it is week one. I have selected Liverpool. I am a Liverpool fan. But then as you're watching, not have any like really buy-in other than like your own word.
Okay,
So
yeah,
what was really neat was to like have the fandom actually be sealed and to be forged within me, because theoretically, if this season was a poor season and Liverpool shockingly finished like seventh or something, there was really nothing stopping me. There was no decades worth of emotional investment in saying like, F it, I guess I'm going to root for City next year. I'm
right,
going to go
right,
back
right,
to
right.
being a neutral. So what was fascinating was all of these varied moments throughout the season that made it so like, no, I did make this decision. I am now emotionally attached to this team and this community, and it was really cool to feel that happen throughout maybe 4 or 5 different moments, to like feel the team, the club, have this grip on you.
Okay, I have a very like inherently philosophical question about fandom. Then relating to that,
Fucking hit me, brother, man.
was it the happier like highs, or was it the lower lows that sealed permanently your emotional attachment to this team?
I have an answer.
Tell me.
Um, it was the tension.
Okay.
So it is both highs and lows, and we can talk about the lows in just a second, particularly the lows on the day that I went to the Van Gogh exhibit. You know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. Which I'm going to tonight, by the way.
Oh, nice, dude! You're gonna freaking love it.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
Oh, it's amazing. So there were a couple moments I remember early on in the season. There was a 3-3 draw versus Brentford, which in retrospect, really wish that had been a 3-2 victory. But
Yep.
I remember that game because there was like 5 second half goals, and I was watching at my house. And Nora was 2.5 months old, so I have all these connections, like experiencing the birth and growth of my daughter. But I was watching with Kate, and my parents were over, and my dad, who's like classic American soccer stupid kind of guy.
Right. Yeah.
He's sitting there. He's gripped. He's on the edge of his seat. There's this recently promoted team that's like kind of taking it to Liverpool. So that was definitely one of them. Another was, and I actually wasn't watching this, I knew that I was really on the hook because I was out getting a Christmas tree. And we go to like one of the farms that you go to and you like cut it down.
Yeah.
And Liverpool were playing Wolves, and it was the first matchup of the season, and it was 0-0 in like 90 plus 4. And I'm sitting there checking my phone, just like refreshing the Google homepage of like seeing what's happening.
Yeah.
And I put it away because we'd found our tree, and I had like 9 texts from you, and it was just like, Origi! And it was lovely to see like I'm hooked in this moment, and then I get to like Google, as again a total noob, who is Divock Origi, then like go down a YouTube history hole, like, oh my god, this guy he scores when it matters most, this is so cool. And then of course the third was maybe the last 15 minutes of the Premier League season.
Yeah. Oof. Okay. Talk about that, because you're one of like the 3 Liverpool fans that still listens to this podcast, because we're pretty obviously like anti-Liverpool.
Yeah, but like you do it in a way that's like, fuck these guys that I also kind of want to hang with, right? Like,
well, yeah, that's my vibe. I'm perpetually surrounded by people I don't like. Like, I'm a Star Wars fan who hates other Star Wars fans, a Chelsea fan who hates other Chelsea fans, and
Yeah,
all
of
of that.
course. Yeah. So I would say that like the biting like tragedy that maybe some people think that I experienced this year, I did not experience
Okay.
the last 15 minutes because the second half of the season was such a wild and magical run for Liverpool in that um, they they were so far down, right? So many points down that like the idea of them making a comeback was so far fetched that like as it began to play out, it sort of felt like you were playing with the house money. That the closer we get to this theoretical Premier League victory, it's all kind of gravy. The biggest tough one was not the last day of the season. I think it was the draw against Spurs because then it became so mathematically unlikely that they were going to pull off this victory that I kind of wrote off the possibility.
Mm.
So even when City's down 2-0 at half and Liverpool just need to beat Wolves at home, which you know they're eventually going to do, um, it had felt like if I'd gotten that gift, like it would have been such an incredible cherry on top of a sundae that if I didn't get it, I'd kind of come to terms with it because it was so unlikely all along. That doesn't
Well,
mean I.
the second half of the season was essentially you texting me side eyes emojis and me saying, "Don't get your hopes up. It's not going to happen." Like, for 6 months
Literally
straight.
every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that I think what I'm about to say is going to make your other co-hosts and potentially listeners very, very mad, and it's going to sound very spoiled. I'm
Okay.
ki- I'm kind of glad they didn't win all four trophies because had they, I feel like I I would have been so profoundly spoiled to
Mm-hmm.
have earned not earned right to have received but not earned this incomprehensible title just because I sat down and said like, hey, here are 7 criteria, maybe I should root for Liverpool, right? So that like had I received that, I don't think I would have earned it. So like this season was magical, and yes, it ended in 2 consecutive weekends of disappointment and like glory being ripped from your fingertips.
Mm-hmm.
But the run of them, winning both the FA and EFL Cups was fascinating and profoundly exciting. And that goddamn 12-11 or 11-10 shootout
In the League Cup. Yeah,
in the League Cup.
The
That
Kepler miss.
the Kepler to the moon.
It was incredible. Incredible. Like, even from a Chelsea perspective, because I don't give a fuck about the League Cup or what's it now, the Carabao Cup? Whatever
Carabao
it is.
Cup. Yeah.
That was just like really good watching because both of those teams were going for it. And anytime Chelsea and Liverpool go up against each other, they go for it.
Man,
like,
it's good.
violent games. I love it.
Yeah. So I don't know if like that last point I tried to make was illogical. That like I'm kind of glad the team that I root for didn't win all the titles, but like I I don't I feel like the pain of getting so close to the most unimaginable Premier League victory and then having it slip away, and then being in the Champions League final and losing to a team that we're pretty clearly a little bit better than. Establishes maybe it's my blood sacrifice to the shibboleth that is pain of sports fandom.
Yeah.
Did I buy in? Right? Do I have to make a sacrifice?
I think there's an inherent romance to what you're saying, though. It makes sense to me. Like, you want to be able to really taste the sweetness of the first Champions League or the first Premier League. The FA Cup and the League Cup, you got those. Those are lesser competitions anyway, like whatever. But like, you wanna fucking feel the high of the first Premier League title, and that only comes with having the perspective of the low.
Yes.
And I think that if they ever do win it again, hopefully they don't, I think that'll be that much sweeter for you. So that makes sense to me. That definitely makes sense to me. Let's finish off this way. Would you recommend the Premier League to your average, like, let's say you're a generic baseball fan who says, like, fuck soccer, soccer's stupid, and you want to sell them on it? Like, what's your selling points for the Premier League? Convince the people to buy in.
Okay. So, there aren't any commercials during the gameplay.
Okay.
So,
great.
like, my God, NFL games. Oh my God, I'm not going to get started on that because that's a separate podcast. But the action is nonstop. There are multiple different elements to the season-long competition that are interesting, both in terms of what we talked about at the top versus title versus fourth place versus Europa versus relegation, that make it so that pretty much wherever your team is in the table, you've got something to fight for and something to run from.
Okay. I like how you phrase that. Very nice.
Thank you. The online fandom is really great. Really good stuff. All football Twitter is just fantastic. And then there's a lot of communities on Reddit that are really fun to engage with. And that it's growing, man. Get in while the stock is low. I had an experience twice in the last couple of weeks. I bought myself my first piece of Liverpool swag.
Okay.
A couple of weeks ago. I bought a hat. Just a little hat. It's red. It says LFC. It has the logo. And I was walking around Providence, Rhode Island, and a guy says to me, "You'll never walk alone." And it was so cool to like get invited by a stranger into this special little club that, at least in America, most people aren't in. And then last week, I'm in Wisconsin. I'm wearing a Liverpool hat again. Another guy in Wisconsin. You'll never walk alone. And for me, like, there's a special uniqueness to being involved in a club. And that club is not Liverpool. That club is soccer fandom. That's globally so significant, but here in America, so currently small. But because it's so small, it's equally as intense and inclusive, and it wants you to join in. It wants more people in. So if you want to join a loving and exciting and a weird little family that gets together at 7:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, I think you should do it.
Hell yeah. The number of times that I've had "Come on, Chelsea" screamed at me from across a parking lot really does make it special. Like,
yeah.
It's good stuff. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
I know I said that we would end there, but do you have any other, like now that you're coming into your second season, what are you still wondering? What haven't you like quite gotten your head around? What's next for you in your growth as a Premier League and Liverpool fan? Like, you haven't really done fantasy. I know that you're talking about interested in maybe doing the Mob Fantasy League. What else is still like to conquer for you? What else is new and exciting?
I don't know if I have any like big lingering questions. What I'd really love to like observe, and maybe like the answer to this question is it doesn't happen, but I'd love to like map the trajectory, long and medium term, of a club going from like middle tier to top tier, or a club growing from lower tier to middle tier, or growing from like we used to be in a lower tier and now we're in the Premier League, and like maintaining an equilibrium there. So maybe that's just like listening to Chuck talk about Palace, right? Because like I think that's kind of what I'm describing.
Yeah.
But I think that process of team building to me is really interesting because it's so foreign from American sports, where there are drafts, right? And like drafts of college players who just sort of come in. So I'm really curious about like, how do teams that don't have like Liverpool and Chelsea and City, these infinite budgets and statistical departments, how do they manage the sea of going from, at threat of relegation consistently to being a mid-table team and feeling like each year you're safe and competitive? That's really sort of just like, that's interesting to me.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I think that a lot of international fans might get something out of this. And if nothing else, it was fun to chat with you for like 45 minutes and just talk about soccer. So,
dude, what an absolute joy.
All right. Well, everybody else, keep an ear out for those Chuck preview pods. I know Ian is genuinely going to do like 6 hours on Wagatha Christie because the Patreons have been asking for it. And we should be back in about a month with the regular show as well. So in the meantime, everyone have a wonderful summer, and we'll see you around the corner.